Hello and welcome again to Stand in the Gap, where with God's help we bring you the critical transcending news of the day, those issues which plague our culture, attack our citizens, our families, our churches, threaten our freedom and liberty, and most importantly, jeopardize God's blessings on us and our nation. Those issues which seem to never get fixed and seem to have no solution. Well, I'm your host, Sam Rohrer, and I'm going to be joined again today by co-host Pastor Isaac Crockett. In the next two programs, we'll uncover the truth about a devastating reality impacting the entire world, and to our great shame, particularly involving the United States of America. Once a nation that shone forth the light of freedom for the world has become the driving engine in modern-day slavery. Oh, not slavery in the same way you might think. This slavery is not focused on a race of people. It's slavery focused on innocent children and young girls, as well as women and some men. It's the cruelest and most inhumane slavery, stealing from people their dignity, their pride, their futures, and for many, their very lives. This theme of our program today and in part two is entitled Modern Day Slavery in Our Backyard, Women and Children in Chains. Recently on our American Pastors Network daily Stand in the Gap Today radio program, Isaac Crockett led the program with our very qualified guest, Becky McDonald, president of Women at Risk International. And I was so moved and shocked at the depth of the horror of the reality of modern-day slavery in our very own backyard that I've asked her to join us for these next two programs. Your hearts will be torn, and I trust that by the time we're done, you'll be moved not only to more prayer, but engagement and watchfulness to not only help these victims, but to help bring justice to the perpetrators of evil who, by their actions, defy the God of heaven and harm one of these little ones Jesus came to save, and then move to action to no longer stand idly by while travesty occurs. So as we do on all of our Stand in the Gap programs, we'll approach this tragic issue through the lens of a biblical worldview, as it is the only worldview that can bring justice and freedom to this horrid slavery and bring healing, redemption, and hope to millions who've been trapped in seemingly hopeless bondage. Now, before we bring in our special guest, Becky McDonald, president of Women at Risk International, let me play just a short clip from a video produced by Women at Risk International that will share some startling statistics and help to set the stage for this most critical program.
There is a war raging against women, and time ticks on while rivers of tears run as a hidden gendercide sweeps the globe. At War International, we unveil what's hidden and reclaim what's beautiful. Yet our war has victims disguised as statistics. Like the 800,000 people illegally trafficked across borders in the 365 days of our year. Half are children, while 70% of trafficked women end up as sexual slaves, chained to beds of horror. In the United States, human trafficking is the fastest growing organized crime. The FBI estimates that 100,000 to 300,000 children are missing. 300 children are sold in Atlanta, Georgia each month. All around our beautiful creation, newborn babies are purchased for $25. Every 15 seconds, in one city alone, a girl is brutally circumcised, while honor killings and acid attacks are disguised as accidents. Fear strikes women around the world, haunted by domestic violence and rape. In total, every 2 to 4 years, 114 to 200 million women go demographically missing from all manners of risk.
I hope that grabbed your attention. It sets the stage for our program today, Modern Day Slavery. In just a moment, we'll be back with our special guest, Becky McDonald.
For over 2,000 years, pastors have carried the light of the gospel. through opposition, persecution, and every flaming arrow of the enemy. But sadly, now more than ever, our nation is experiencing a period of spiritual darkness. But what would happen if churches threw off the shackles of fear and boldly stood for truth? If 100,000 pastors around the nation joined together and committed to preaching God's word no matter the consequence? Pastors who are unaffected by changing times and the opinions of men? What would happen if America's pulpits became aflame with the preaching of righteousness? The great darkness from rejecting God's standards would be expelled, the prayers of God's people heard, our nation healed, and God's blessings restored. The time has come to stand.
Well, welcome back to Stand in the Gap, and our special focus today, our theme, modern-day slavery in our backyard, women or children and women in slavery. And I want to welcome in right now our special guest, Becky McDonald. Becky, welcome to Stand in the Gap today. We're so thankful you can be with us today for a few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for being a voice of the silenced.
Well, I'm glad for the work that you have done. You know, when we see just the brief statistics that were in that previous video clip, you did make a statement there. Statistics, there's a lot of them. They're not good statistics. But there's a name and there's a face behind every one of them. And in this program, I want us to not only lay out the reality of the statistics, but also never lose sight of the fact of the value of the life that God has created that's represented in every one of these children and these women. And the fact that God's love for them is so great. And that's what all of this is about. We don't want to lose track of that. At the same time, bringing the perpetrators to justice who could even do these kinds of things is incredible. We want to make sure we can do that as well. But Becky, just a minute or two here. I want our folks to know, our listeners to know just a little bit about who you are. How did Becky McDonald get involved in this? I know that you grew up overseas, but to what extent did your upbringing bring you into contact with human trafficking and put this burden in your heart?
Well, my family moved overseas to the land of East Pakistan when I was 5 years old, and I spent all my formative years in lands steeped in traditions of the Taliban. I went to boarding school in West Pakistan. By the age of 14, we had been through 2 wars already, and the war at age 14 was the War of Liberation, where East Pakistan was attacked by West Pakistan and a genocide was conducted against the Bangladeshi people. And my family stayed there through those wars so my father could protect the Bangladeshi people. My girlfriend was raped during that war and fought back. And to teach her, you are a woman in that particular context. You have no voice. You are bought and sold in a marriage contract. You cannot fight back. They poured acid, not in her face, as would be usual, but down her throat to take her vocal cords away forever. And the acid of her suffering burned a hole in my heart, and it set me on a pathway of being the voice of the silenced and wrapping arms of love around them and giving them the message that they were created with worth and dignity. We are not the sum total of all the junk that's been done to us. And so today, Women at Risk is in over 50 countries, and we address many risk issues. But human trafficking is the one we're most known for because it is the fastest growing arm of crime. And while it may start with abuse or domestic violence or many other problems, it is the fastest growing issue that we're dealing with in the world and in the United States of America. And so we are just simply an organization that seeks to give voice to the silenced, give them a safe place where they can rewrite the story of their life, start over and learn to make a living with dignity, and wrap around services and just love on them.
Well, Becky, that is such a powerful just illustration there, and what you're saying is just so moving. And to think of your friend growing up, that they took her voice, and I think that is such a perfect object lesson of what's going on when people are enslaved, when they're trafficked like this, that they feel helpless, they feel that nobody hears them. And so when we see these statistics, like what we saw in the video there, we're looking at 800,000 people or more. And again, it's so hard to know the exact numbers because this is all done in secret. And I guess that's the hard thing. There is no voice that we necessarily hear, and you're talking about shedding light on this. It's, looking for this, looking at half of the people trafficked are children, at babies being bought. How could you maybe help us figure out, many people listening to this, I know the first time that my wife came back from Women at Risk meeting and the war boutique and things, she was just telling me, you wouldn't believe all this. And then I went to one, and I actually heard you speak at one too, and it changes your thoughts about what's going on. But could you maybe help those in our audience who are listening right now, who maybe they find this all just almost overwhelming? How does this go about in a modern day society like America or anywhere? How is this able to happen that so many people are involved with this?
Well, over a decade ago, Homeland Security called our offices here in West Michigan, and they were coming to West Michigan, nice little Midwest, area here, and they were coming here 3 times a week because human trafficking was just that bad even here. Today, they have a full-time staff. When they came into my life about 12, 13 years ago, I shared with them that our global international rescue was becoming babies, more and more young children. We had just rescued a baby sold at 2 weeks old for $200. She was rescued at 1 month old. Today she's 9. And I was sharing with them that, and they were saying, yes, in the land of the free. They were looking at that time for a pay-per-view of a live attack of a 6-month-old in the land of the free. And we've seen testimony of 2-week-old children being attacked with the umbilical cord still attached. So evil knows no boundaries. And this problem is not, a lot of human traffickers are women, by the way. A UN study found that more than half of trafficking, the person who does the force, coercion, and fraud is a woman. So this is not a gender problem. This is not male versus female. Yes, men are the buyers, but a lot of the actual slavery and the beating and the stitches and the scamming is done woman on woman. So this was a heart problem. Men, women, and children all over the world prey on their most vulnerable, and it's about money. It's very, very lucrative. 2 to 3 women in a stable can bring in $500,000 tax-free. And so this is just about making money and greed, unfortunately, and the heart is deceitfully wicked. And so as an addiction in the sexual area, the addiction becomes more and more needing newer and newer and different things. The age of the victim is going down. The things that are being done are getting more and more horrific. And I have rocked women and children in my arms that I can't even describe. I wouldn't publicly tell you what was done to them. And so it breaks your heart that humanity can turn on itself. And yet the good news is, I don't want anybody to be discouraged by this, because I have the luxury of hindsight, and I can look back on decades of working with wounded people and see that people can put their lives back together. They can rebuild, they can rise up and be mighty trophies of God's grace and warriors and step into this issue. And there's great hope. There are thousands of stories of men, women, and children who have put their lives back together.
And we're so glad to have you on here to tell these stories for us and to show us. But as you have worked with with human trafficking and helping people find freedom, how have you seen it grow? I mean, it seems like it's getting worse from what you're saying with this love for money. It's becoming, technology even is helping. How have you seen it grow, and has it even surprised you at the growth, even maybe the last 10, 20 years?
I believe that we teach 15 demographics, or 15 things that draw the eye of a trafficker to a community. And the top 2, the number 1 is the internet, cybercrime. 100 years ago, many years ago, we got rid of legal slavery. We did not get rid of racism. We have a long way to go on that. But we now have a slavery, thanks to the internet, that has more victims than all the slaves ever from the beginning of time. And it's because of the computer. You no longer have to park your car in a nasty parking lot. You can dial up a rate to your specifications. You can dial up virtual trafficking on your phone, on your computer. Our children are sitting in their American history class minding their own business, and they're getting 40 text messages an hour from somebody going, hey honey, you're 13, I'm 13, meet me at McDonald's. I know a girl that was trafficked from a Wendy's and one for a hot dog and a Slurpee. And so I think the internet is why, I mean, we've had slavery since the beginning of time, but the reason this is a wildfire today is because of the internet. And so whenever they do raids around the Super Bowl time, because, you know, vacationing and big events are one of the flashpoints or demographics, over 90% of the people they rescue from trafficking, it started on the internet. And we're not going to throw our computers away any more than we throw cars away because people drive drunk. And so we just have to teach our children, and we have to come up with ways to show them that this is a public forum. It's like we're in a mall shopping. It's like we're in the park. And so we have to be monitoring those things for our children because they're innocent and they don't know that the camera in the Skype, your computer can be left on long after you've turned it off, and it can be watching you while you're getting ready for bed or taking a bath or whatever. And so we have got to step into this in a new way as adults and as professionals. So that's the number one reason. And then the second reason is that we have a youth culture now that no longer views sexuality the same way. And so many what we would consider sexual acts are considered nothing to them. They're like a good night kiss or, you know, parties where things are going on that would be considered oral or sexuality by us. They don't see it that way. So into that setting comes the slimy reach of the trafficker. And he says, hey, honey, you may not be poor and hungry, but you want a $400 Prada bag? You do this 4 times for me, and I'll give you $400, and you can buy that Prada bag. Or make some other little girl do it. And we have women on, girls, young minors on tape saying, I'm going to recruit your prissy 9-year-old to go to a party that she can't drive herself home from because I want my stuff. And so I think that youth culture in the West and the internet and cybercrime are the reasons why this is a wildfire today, and it wasn't 100 years ago or even 50 years ago when we didn't really have computers like we do.
Well, Becky, I'd like you to go a little further here. You've described this is a global issue, we know. That 800,000 number, whatever I think was a global number. Let's bring it down to the United States. We talk about modern day slavery in our backyard. I don't think most Americans have any idea of what's actually happening in the United States. I made a statement earlier in the program that the United States may be the driving engine behind it, perhaps our money, whatever it may be, but talk to us about some numbers and statistics here in our own United States.
Well, we are a global and international organization, and so of course our focus was overseas, but over a decade ago when Homeland Security came into my offices in West Michigan, and I was looking for the 800,000 to 1 million, and of that, the 17,500 that are brought to this country, because depending on the study, we're the 3rd highest destination country in the world, but only 17,500 of that million come here. And what I learned from them was that inside our borders, inside the land of the free, your daughter, your granddaughter, my granddaughter, children with constitutional rights, American citizens, up to 300,000 minors, and that is just the minor statistic, Sam. Up to 300,000 minors a year, American children, are at risk of trafficking inside our borders. We have a problem inside America. This is in our schools, in our rural communities where there aren't jobs, in our cities, in our suburbs. This is everywhere.
So Becky, in reality, is there any place in the United States, is there any state in the United States that is not afflicted with this travesty to some degree?
No, there is a very well done report that grades every state It's funded by the government, and it's called the Shared Innocence, and it gives every state a grade, not on how much trafficking they have, but on how well resourced they are in fighting trafficking. And it comes out every year, and it speaks to the trafficking issue from the standpoint of law enforcement and resources and social work and police and all that. And I know in Michigan last year we had a D grade. This year we went to a B grade because we've been working on changing our laws and training, which is why I've been doing so much medical training. Now doctors and nurses are mandated to be trained. And so we have a long way to go on this. I believe that progressive improvement is better than delayed perfection. And so I'm thankful for the baby steps, but we have very far to go. And it's a problem in every state, whether it's rural. I could tell you stories of survivors that we've dealt with where they were trafficked from rural areas, well, Becky, where there were no jobs.
Becky, I'm going to ask you to hold it right now. We're going to go away for a break. And when we come back, I want you to put some faces and some names on some specific examples to which you're just referencing. Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching right now Stand in the Gap today. Our theme, modern day slavery in our own backyard. Stay with us. We're going to put some faces on this with our special guest, Becky McDonald, in just a moment.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of WBPH Philadelphia, positively different television. To watch archives of this program, go to WBPH.org.
Welcome back to Stand in the Gap, and we've been talking with our friend Becky McDonald. She's the president of Women at Risk International, looking at the issue of human trafficking and this exploitation of other people right here in our own backyard. And so as we close out this program today, Becky, could you maybe just take a couple of minutes here to maybe put some faces on some of these statistics that we've seen?
Yes, the problem with statistics is you tend to glaze over and think they're numbers, but each one of them is a life. I could talk to you about a girl who was trafficked from suburbia, upper middle class community in Detroit. She needed a ride home from school. Her mom, how many of us have been in that situation, right? Her mom was late coming. A boy comes out that she knows from mass. She goes to church with, offers her a ride, she gets permission, and he gives her date rape drug and proceeds to traffic her for 3 years. I could talk to you about a girl in a city in Chicago whose mother hunted at church nurseries. She sold her own daughter from age 2 to age 11. At age 11, the father rescued the daughter and got her out of that situation, but the mother would go to different churches and work in the nursery and get close to family so she could babysit, and then she would exploit, abuse, and sell those children. I could talk to you about another woman who I've been in court with her lately for days on end, and she was recruited and trafficked by her family in a rural area to hunters. Michigan is a hunting state, and during hunting season, she and all her siblings were sold to hunters for their entertainment, for sexual activity. And so it doesn't matter whether it's a city, whether it's suburbia, whether it's upper middle class, whether it's poor, whether it's rural, children are at risk in every community, and they are hunting in all these communities because they're looking for something that they can exploit. The good news on all three of those stories is they're all survivors who are thrivers, and one of them is a social worker who helps rescue. All three of them help rescue, and the good news is that they've all put their lives back together and are helping with other people who are in the same situation and using their story to buy back the pain and be that circle of protection to those that were not, as in a way where people weren't there for them.
And Becky, we're going to have to hold it right there. I'm going to ask you to come back. We're going to do a second part of this program where we're going to go into cause, how'd we get here, and then solution. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching Stand in the Gap today. Our theme, modern day slavery in our backyard, women and children in chains, right here in the United States. I hope that what you've seen so far has shocked you. I hope that it's awakened you. I hope that it does something to change your life and your thinking, to understand the evil of the day, but also to understand the love of God who can redeem and make whole. And as we've heard, these survivors can be thrivers through Jesus Christ. We want you to know that. Join us again in part 2 for modern day slavery in our backyard.